Buenos días y bienvenidos a la Casa de América. Celebramos hoy la 5ª edición de los diálogos bajo el tema Agua y resiliencia a los efectos del cambio climático.
A partir de ahora es imposible pensar en planificación, gestión, servicios asociados al agua si no integran siempre su conformidad con los escenarios de cambio climático. ¿Qué es lo que nos podemos encontrar? ¿Cómo podemos responder? Ya no nos valen patrones medios, tenemos que empezar a pensar en extremos y estar preparados para los extremos.
La paz, la prosperidad y la salud del planeta están ligadas a este recurso tan frágil y amenazado, tan valioso y tan inaccesible para millones de personas. Ojalá, y confiamos en ello, estos diálogos, y este en particular, sean parte de la alianza global necesaria para protegerla.
El cumplimiento del derecho humano al agua y al saneamiento y a la seguridad hídrica en general es una tarea impostergable. Es parte del camino para erradicar la pobreza extrema y la exclusión social. Así lo entendemos desde CAF, con prioridad manifiesta en nuestra agenda Agua CAF 2019-2022.
Así como tenemos una muy buena cobertura de abastecimiento de agua y agua de calidad, tenemos un saneamiento pésimo. O sea, tenemos un saneamiento básico del 75% que es a través de tanques sépticos, pero el saneamiento avanzado, que es el saneamiento colectivo, no tenemos más que el 15%. O sea que tenemos una brecha gigante ahí. Creemos en lo que es la reutilización del agua, pero por supuesto antes tenemos que hacer inversiones.
Una de las herramientas fundamentales de la gestión hidráulica es la planificación. Es la planificación porque así lo plantean las directivas comunitarias europeas y así lo establece el ordenamiento jurídico español. Esa planificación normalmente, como ha dicho su director, es la planificación, el plan hidrológico de cuenca, pero dada la relevancia de estos fenómenos extremos, el Ministerio desde hace tiempo ya ha planificado para prevenir los efectos de las sequías y los efectos de las inundaciones.
Desde los años 80 venimos padeciendo en cada década 2, 3, 4 años de sequía. Por lo tanto, eso ya no es un fenómeno extraordinario, sino que se ha convertido en algo habitual que hay que gestionar de manera continua.
El agua del futuro tiene 3 componentes: el de ser más eficientes, el de ser menos contaminantes y el de dar oportunidad a la reutilización de los recursos hídricos que disponemos actualmente.
Creo que no hay mucho más que decir, sino simplemente invitarlos a todos a que el año que viene, que va a coincidir con la celebración de los 50 años de vida de CAF, podamos tener unos ricos y auguriosos 6º diálogos del agua. Gracias a todos.
Buenos días, Latinoamérica. Buenas tardes, España.
Good morning, Latin America and Spain authorities and dear friends. I'm Alejandro Maceira, Director of Water, and I will be your guide today in this session. Welcome to the 6th session of the Water Dialogues of Latin America and Spain. CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, is organizing it together with the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Environment of Spain, the European Union and cooperation, and with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation. We thank the support of Europa Press, the media partner of our session. This event is a mandatory meeting for everyone approaching the matter in both sides of the Atlantic. In this occasion, we are gathering virtually, as expected, to deal with a topic which is highly current, the value of water in all its dimensions. Before we start the session, I should tell you that you can follow and comment on our meeting with the hashtag Water Dialogues, Agenda CAF accounts and water accounts. We have available simultaneous interpretation in English and Portuguese. You can have access to it through the channels available at caf.com. With further ado, let's get started with the opening talk by Luis Carranza Ugarte, Executive President of CAF. Dear Teresa Rivera, Deputy Prime Minister of Spain and Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge of Spain. Dear members of the panel, dear friends and colleagues, for me it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the 6th edition of the Water Dialogues. In this opportunity, dialogue will be held virtually because of the pandemic affecting us all. This pandemic has struck Latin America and the Caribbean significantly in its health and its economy. And the reason why the stroke has been so severe has to do with the big gaps in infrastructure in the region. One of the basic recommendations amidst the pandemic is the frequent hand washing with water and soap, but 165 million Latin Americans still do not have access to safe water sources. 300 million have no access to reliable sanitation services. So in this opportunity, we are going to reflect on the value of water from all its perspectives. The first panel will talk about the economic consumption perspective and productive uses of water. The second panel will deal with the environmental and cultural value of water. To value water is a call for action. It's to recognize the value of this resource for life, for health, for growth, and for the general well-being of all individuals. So it is a call for the efficient use and preservation of such a precious resource. Thank you all very much for participating in such an important event. Thank you very much for your kind words, President. And now I greet Teresa Rivera, 4th Deputy Prime Minister of Spain and Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge of Spain. Rivera. Thank you so much, Alejandro, and President Carranza, thank you so much. For me, it is a great pleasure to address you, though it is in this virtual format. This virtual format reflects the beginning of Alexandro's presentation, a classic. This is a classic that we were all expecting with great enthusiasm. We enjoy, we learn, and we have the opportunity to share concerns, proposals, experiences amongst a community that is that evolves around water and life. We see how transcendental water is for the well-being and the future of people when they feel comfortable and satisfied, knowing that we have plenty to contribute with. Faced with such an extreme situation, such as the one we all live today, we have learned to look back at the essentials, at the basics, at the basic things that sustain life, the life we want to live with families and friends and partners. And so we have imagined what the comfort of our homes are, the basic things we need. So we have been forced to think on the basics that we take for granted most of the time. Within this context of the pandemic, with such a severe healthcare crisis, with social and economic consequences that are dramatic worldwide, and so we see the best of our society showing up, support, mutual support, and we have seen the wantings, the drawbacks, the difficulties we have, and what we need to do to support those who are in greater need. In Latin America, to discover in many of our communities the lack of enough infrastructure to guarantee access to water and sanitation, access to smart use of water. That has been key in affecting health conditions amongst families. In many parts of the world, we've seen that life confined to the walls of a home has now made it difficult to access water when the sources of fresh water are away from home. ECLAC has presented a report on how to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. This year, we should have had the meeting in San Jose, Costa Rica, but instead it was held virtually, as we do today. Data are concerning, just reviewing the most important of references. We see the drawbacks. Where do we need to strengthen to bridge the inequalities in our region? Poverty, lack of development, 185 million people unemployed, and this rate is increasing as a result of the crisis. 12% has increased compared to the previous year. Severe familiar situations hidden behind the economic crisis. We know that the economic toll and social toll will take long to compensate beyond the time we get a vaccine and treatment for the general population. And we know well that coming out of a crisis that makes us look back at what's basic, essential, and important. It makes us think of equity and sustainability more than ever. Either we do it all together from both sides of the Atlantic and on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. And this crisis once again tells us how bridging gaps and thinking of people and strengthening basic services, looking for solutions that are compatible with natural resources that condition us all is essential. This is a time when water is life. It's a source of health. It maintains hygiene and sanitation levels. And it supports progress, development, and in the homes. Water support, sanitation, access to water, all this is essential to all of us. So those of us who have responsibilities in public offices and agencies and we are those who are responsible in companies, corporations, devoted to providing water services, have to work and start planning on how to overcome the crisis. How are we going to exit this crisis? 845 million people do not have basic and elemental access to water. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 21 million people are found under conditions that put them at risk. They are excluded and vulnerable. The great favelas and slums of urban areas have problems with concentrations of families under poor conditions. The pandemic has stalled economy and development, and every family is stuck in their own situation. Public service providers, which are access to water and sanitation services and even sewage, have been working hard to maintain the minimum services to have the minimum conditions to have dignified service in each home. It is true that conditions of consumption has changed. Consumption patterns have changed. From the sanitary and healthcare point of view, there have been important recommendations. Our predecessors knew of the capacity of water to produce hygiene. And so it's more apparent than ever now that the water supply must be constant. In the latest months of crisis in Spain, thanks to the water authorities and operators, I thank them. All those who work in that sector, I thank them for keeping the service up. 100% of the services have been provided with the same level of warranty and quality as before. So this is an essential service. I know we are asking from them more than we ask from anyone else. The water and power services are essential, so this must not be interrupted. The urban cycle of water, to manage it, has been essential as well. Professionals understanding the potential there is to be learned, the water cycle, the variables involved in it, in which I know that there's nothing attractive in sewage water, but controlling that helps to control early disease. We can detect the incidence of disease in each urban area by assessing virus concentration in wastewater. The coronavirus management plan involves all this, working jointly with the sanitation ministry and together with the sanitation institutes. Now we have available information to predict and track with facts what's going on in our cities. It is true that at the same time, as we work to reduce the scourge of the pandemic, we work in recovering and supporting people who are directly affected by the pandemic, either in their health or in the economy. So we must jointly think on how to harness the opportunity to better recover from the crisis, to improve our customary way of working. We are convinced that in this time where we come back to basics, we can improve the quality of life of people by impacting services associated to water. And at the same time, we do so by generating employment and economic growth, supporting public organizations and private companies. We do so by harnessing opportunities created by agencies. The Corporación Andina de Fomento, the CAF, and the Development Bank of Latin America have been working hard to support us all in this sense. In Latin America, we must strengthen water safety programs, biosafety programs, hydrosanitary sector to protect the resource. And in the short term, we must guarantee inclusion, make sure no one's left behind, grant basic access to drinking water to millions of people in Latin America and the Caribbean, those who still do not have access to water and sewage. This is an opportunity to include improvements in our water management capacity. The digital transformation provides efficiency and greater tracking capacity, a better care of our resources. That's extraordinary. Automated systems capable of operating in our complex systems without errors. It provides accurate data through remote detection, supporting the healthcare sector as well. So there are many initiatives we are putting together in Spain as we think of our recovery plan. Two key messages arise from Brussels: the commitment of collective solidarity commitment in the European Union, and we know that the answer goes beyond that. It can start locally and regional. It's easier if you work at a lower scale. Some of these initiatives include the green impact, the temporal dimension as well, involving the following generations. Recovery must include the current problems, and it should aim at resolving the problems of our children and grandchildren, of future generations of citizens. So in this investment framework, water sector is essential because it will build resilience against climate change. This is a delicate resource, and in Latin America and Spain, it should be part of the climate policy. We should be paying special attention to it. This is essential for development and well-being. All forecasts agree that water management will most likely be different in the future. Changes brought about by climate, like the increase in the average temperature and greater variability, will make the resource availability a problem, and so we will have to plan for anything which is anything but an average level that we expected. So we need to combine natural sources of water, whether groundwater or surface water, with other sources of water like desalinization. These are solutions that require forward-thinking, development, investment with complex systems that are resilient, because we know that the future will be more demanding than the past. Our citizens will be more demanding. The different use of soils and resources forces us to think of safety measures. It is obvious we must mitigate the changes in uses of the soil, but still we must work hard in the context where the risk of flooding, the economic and human impact forces us to plan on the use of the soils, adequate use of the soils, safety systems, early detection, and to work on prevention, basically, anticipating events before they occur. And then we must also think on the natural courses of water, basins, analyzing those courses to be able to resist extreme weather conditions. and build and set up new control and prevention networks to provide us with an early warning. These are some of the scenarios we must study for the near future, looking for solutions that we must adequately incorporate in our new planning hydraulic cycle, where we are already working in Spain, and investment in sanitation of water. 3,400 measures have already been passed with high levels of investment.
As you know, we currently look for putting this process to finalization before 2021. So planning will activate new investments for future times. But before this, we will have to make sure that measures will focus on thinking about the way in which that investment can get materialized quicker. We want to underscore sanitation because we'll still have a long way to go. We cannot afford the privilege of not taking fast, committed, and a nimble reaction in the territory. Necessary investments have to include small communities, isolated communities in areas with very low populational density require special attention as well. Therefore, we should be working together with big metropolitan areas, but with small communities as well. And this responsibility is shared by the various administrations at various levels, various administrations that relate to water management and with the rest of policies that have an impact on the good availability and water management. The crisis we are faced with demands a paramount effort on our side, and it gives us the possibility to consolidate on something where we need to walk our talk. We need to work together, join efforts, look for partnerships among regulators, service providers, manufacturers, technology developers. This dialogue spaces, with all the admiration they produce in me, whatever the circumstances, are especially important in a moment like this, where every person at home with their concerns and worries expect from us that we should be capable of engaging in relevant dialogues so that we put this into effective action in no time at all. I'm determined, as is the case every year, this will be a new occasion to show and renew this practical commitment represented by this forum. Thank you so much to all of you.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your intervention and the significant ideas you have contributed to the audience, to the followers that we have already. After these wonderful opening remarks, we will jump ahead on the program of this 6th Water Dialogue, Latin America, Spain, in the need of putting a relevance to the water value, especially right now where we are living the impact of COVID-19. It is relevant to analyze it through its diverse dimensions and multiple uses. To that end in mind, we have Benedicto Braga, the honorary chairperson of the Water Council and CEO. He will be focusing this on his presentation, determining a framework for future scenarios. The scope, outlook, and the value of water. Mr. Braga. Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. Unfortunately, so my Spanish is not good enough for me to present in Spanish in this wonderful language. So with all the due respect and with your allowance, I'll switch to Portuguese. But I promise I will follow. I will not speed up. Miss Teresa Ribeira, and the demographic challenge. Excellent, Ms. Ruiz Carranza, the executive president of CAF. I'd like to thank the invitation to take part in this wonderful event of Latin America, of promotion for Latin America, Spain and Latin America. Today, I'm thinking about this concept. I was thinking about this concept. Dimensions and perspectives. I have a presentation to make. And this will be presented on the screen. Next slide, please.
A primeira coisa é ver que a água conecta a sociedade.
The first thing is to see that water connects society. It connects economy, ecology, and culture. In terms of human settlement, up until 2050, we will have 70% of people who will continue to live in cities. 2 billion people have no access to drinking water and sanitation. Food production increased demand by 70% until 2050. 70% of water resources from the world is used for irrigation. Energy and industry increased demand up to 40% up until 2030. 1.3 billion people have no access to electricity. 50% of the wetlands have already been lost because rivers do not flow into the ocean. Ecology is a major concern in this context. Culture and religion. Water bears with it a very relevant significance in all religions around the world. Wouldn't you agree with me on that one? It has a symbolism behind it, behind baptism or cleanliness. It's used to communicate, and it's used for other purposes. It brings faithful people together in religious celebrations. Well, next slide. This is interrelation of water, energy, and production of food. It's a bond that brings them together. It becomes increasingly important. This report on the trends out to 2030 show this growing bond that brings these three elements together. The same agency identified that water can transform itself into the most important sources for bringing together energy and minerals up until 2030, both internally in countries and also considering the country-to-country relationship, the perception that water is a fundamental element comes from the private sector. The World Economic Forum showed, as can be seen on this chart, the probability of this impact and what the most important issues are to be considered in the private sector and among business leaders. Here we see a bigger impact and a greater probability. We see here the Northeast region, and we see that water supply shortages, water safety when at risk, and the lack of food availability are highly intertwined with the issue of water unavailability. Can we go back one slide, please? So let's talk about water availability. Waterway availability. Up until 2025, 2/3 of the world population will live in countries under water stress. Today, we are already witnessing this. In Latin America, we've seen this to be the case in many regions. We've seen extreme conditions of dry seasons or droughts. And here, we can see that this is also a major political situation. Water has a fundamental meaning for national security. Here I'll be quoting the planning minister from India. We can solve the energy problem, but we cannot find a solution to the problem we are having with water. When Jinbao, the Chinese premier, says that water shortage is a threat to the survival of the Chinese nation, Anwar Sadat in 1979 said that the only issue that could lead Egypt to war would again be water. Here we see the connection between water and food production, how relevant water is to produce food and how relevant it is to promote growth in countries. The thing is that countries, the wealthier nations, when we see the hydrology map in these countries, if we take a look at the chart, then we have variation vis-a-vis waterfall in general, as can be evidenced on the blue chart, on the blue square. These are the most developed countries. There is low variability and low waterfall intensity. So hydrology is more favorable. Developing countries, on their part, have a high variability, and on average, waterfall is high. So on the upper right-hand side square, this is a chart that was taken from Zimbabwe, and we can see what the growth is like in terms of GDP, what the correlation is between GDP and rainfall. When there is rain, there's economic growth periods, and vice versa. Why is that the case? Because there is no resilient enough infrastructure, as was stated by the minister in her opening remarks. And by the same token, excessive rainfall, as can be seen on the columns on the bottom hand side of the screen in red and blue, show economic losses in countries devoid of any such infrastructure, that is, developing countries, where we have GDP losses of around 14% vis-a-vis the most developed nations in the world, with a loss that is close to 4%. This is the level of risk and how it does impact the level of development, and how, in turn, the level of development has an impact on risk. That's only common sense. This is an issue that cannot get that easily identified. And on this chart, we see the most developed countries. On the upper right-hand corner, countries that are fitted with infrastructure and that do have investment available, therefore their GDP is higher. Then the question we should ask ourselves, is it that they have more infrastructure because they have more development, or is it that they have more development as a result of their greater infrastructure? Which is the message here? Water has to it a fundamental value for developing the society and the economies of countries. And infrastructure development cannot be deferred. And therefore, climate and climate change will have an increasing relevance on the development of our country. CAF should provide funding for infrastructure. They have to provide funds for reservoirs so that resilience and change, or resilience to change, can be increased. And now I'll wear the hat of the CEO of SABESP in order to show you what we have carried out during this period, during the pandemic period. Here, under the area, the scope of SABESP, we operate 365 municipalities in Sao Paulo with a population of 28 million inhabitants. With the outbreak of this pandemic, the economic situation was quite complex. Just take a look at the social and economic inequality that can be readily seen in my country, Brazil. This is the capital city. On the left, this is Paraisópolis, favela, and on the right, a building, a department building, and each one of the balconies has their own swimming pool, and there's a tennis court as part of the amenities. So the social condition is quite complex. And upon the outbreak of the pandemic, many of these people who live in the favelas, the ones on the picture, lost their jobs, or they didn't have any more possibilities to even have an unregistered job. And since April down to September this year, we exempted 500,000 families from payment. We did not interrupt water services, but we didn't collect water or sewage collection. Services were at no cost to those people. Here we pay a lot more attention to these by means of smartphone applications. Well, these are water tanks. And why do they look like this? Because our system, since you have to bring pressure on the pipeline considerably overnight so as to avoid leakages or cracks, especially upland on the favela, there is no water supply because there is no enough pressure. So people need to have tanks like this to be able to have water at night. Many of these people didn't even have a water tank, so we distributed close to 4,500 water tanks like this. We carried out disinfection activities with a sodium concentration in several hospital facilities, both in the metropolitan area and in the rest of the country. We also provided sinks for people to be able to wash their hands. And this is for homeless people. Here, these are food staples for those who don't even have food to eat. We distribute 120,000 units with food staples, enough for people to have nutrition worth for a month. And in order to conclude, I'll touch upon this issue, legal water. That's the name of the program. As the minister also said, she talked about this, in some areas there are major difficulties in providing water supply and sanitation. As can be seen here, what about these hoses that you may see? This is where water is bypassed from our pipes down to the houses. People do not pay, they just use this service in an irregular manner. There's a lot of water loss, and this program that is called Legal Water that we have implemented and we have summoned the private sector and we have commissioned them to carry out this work, and they get paid based on results, based on their outcomes. They are jointly and severally responsible for the service provided to people. This is a good encouragement. Here we have benefits for over 130,000 families. These are 130,000 households in the last 3 years that were served as a result of this initiative. There is a new program that will be shortly implemented that will make this figure grow twice as much. In this case, thanks to the support of your competitors, the World Bank, we would like to work very strongly with you in the future, in close cooperation with you. So this concludes my presentation. I apologize for having used 2 extra minutes from the original time assigned. Thank you very much.
Previsto. A continuación.
Thank you very much. Next, the first expert session. After such a wonderful presentation by Mr. Braga to set up the context, let's jump straight into a session entitled The Value of Water in Latin America and Spain. We'll focus on consumption, hygiene, and productive uses. Water is essential for health and nutrition. The first barrier against the virus is hand washing, so access to water and hygiene becomes more important. We're talking about an essential resource for human consumption and productive industrial agricultural uses. So, water sources, aquifers, must be managed properly, finding the balance in between use and availability. It is essential so as not to deplete the resource. For this discussion, we have a panel of experts that will help analyze the perspective from different standpoints. Urban services, a basin management, and a forum specializing on climate. So I call on the members of the panel. I start from the moderator, Franz Rojas, who is the coordinator of the water agenda within CAF. The members of the panel shall be Malena Galmarini, the president of Argentine Water and Sanitation, AISA, in Argentina. Then Joaquín Páez, president of the Guadalquivir Hydrographic Confederation from Spain. Javier Manzanares, deputy executive director of the Green Climate Fund. Mr. Fran Rojas, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Alejandro, for your kind introduction. Congratulations to Benito Braga for his wonderful presentation. I know the hard work he's doing to promote water access in the metropolitan area of Sao Paulo. In fact, as we have seen, water is used in many uses, so it is valued and perceived in many different ways. Those who have water 24/7 will perceive it in a different way than a person that has to walk for kilometers every day to obtain some water. Water is dynamic, especially in the times of climate change and a pandemic. So, as Alejandro said, we will discuss 2 perspectives. The value of water, its social value for human consumption and hygiene, and the productive uses, where we have irrigation for agriculture, mining, industry. So with the first round with the president of ISA, Malena Galmarini, in addition to being president there, she's also president of the Federation of Water and Sanitation Authorities of Latin America, so she can give us a global perspective. Malena, nice to have you here. I will start by asking you, based on the efforts ISA is making, we know since access to water has been declared a human right, many countries have updated the constitution to incorporate this right. However, we need to point out to universal access to water because it contributes to health and nutrition, and it's a matter of social justice. ISA, one of the most important companies in Latin America, 14 million users of water and sewage services, you have expanded your area of coverage to 9 districts. And growth implies that you cover homes that are still not connected to the water network. 3 million people are still not connected to the water grid. So Malena, what value ISA perceives on water to make sure that the greater amount of our population has access to water? And what's your social strategy to provide access? Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. First, I'll just thank the government of Spain and CAF, Franz, Julian, Luis. I want to thank everyone for the invitation. I want to thank the members of the panel. You should know that for me it's a great honor and pleasure to address you all. As being said, ISA is a large company. We hold 90% is held by the state and 10% belongs to the workers of the company. Our area of coverage is the city of Buenos Aires and 17 municipalities. We have expanded our coverage to 9 more municipalities of the province of Buenos Aires. In an area that is highly populated, the greater Buenos Aires, which is now hit by the economic crisis, the destruction of the social fabric, destruction caused by unemployment and poverty. 2.5 million people living in this area inhabit these informal settlements we call slums. There is no water grid within those slums. We have about 100 of these slums. Most of them would find a grid around them, and we are reaching them with our expansion works when we work to expand the grid. France, you should know that this year we've expanded 1,200 kilometers of pipelines, water pipes, to universalize in as much as we can the water service. We understand that access to water is social justice, is a human right. So in the greater Buenos Aires, where we have 3,400 square kilometers and 30% of our total national population inhabits under conditions that have been affected by the pandemic, and so these are less than adequate. We have cities that require a human look. We are physically close but separated in other ways. So we work hard with the great investment and support of the state and of multilateral credit international bodies to reach more people as soon as possible and reach the marginalized mostly, those who suffer the most. The previous speaker said that the pandemic has presented a greater challenge, has placed a greater responsibility on us in all countries, not just in Latin America and Spain. The crisis has given us as well an opportunity for humans to stand up to the challenge and realize that water is not an infinite resource. We need to care for it. We need to care for our environment. We need to care for our water sources and environment. It's time that we understand that we need to develop technology to support our environment through forum, through discussions and conversations. We need to find new solutions. A striking piece of information from Argentina, we know that when the state took over the responsibility of water and sewage in the late 800s and created the National Agency on Water, they did so as a result of the pandemic of the yellow fever. 100 years later, a new pandemic strikes, and some Argentinians at least, still need and require two essential services to maintain quality of life: water and sewage, to maintain better health, better education, to care for their environment, so that women don't have to carry water together with their children from a remote source of water to their home. And we know we still have plenty to do, not just within the area that ISA covers. The political willingness exists. The national government, President Alberto Fernandez, has put at the forefront of the agenda water and sewage, and has also included it in the national budget. In 2020, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of the difficulties that the pandemic has brought about, there is a budget allocation on water and sewage in 2020 and in 2021, a greater budget that had originally been planned before the pandemic. And that way, 2,500 kilometers of the water grid will be built and annexed by next year. There is no choice here for our countries. The water grids must be built and extended with the support of the national governments. It's an absolute must. And we need the support of the provincial governments, the municipal governments, working together in an agenda where we prioritize public works, putting the most deprived first as a priority. But again, I said, in cooperation with subnational and sub-provincial governments and administrations. We're devoted to, preoccupied and occupied on making sure that water in Argentina, Latin America, and the world is more than just a basic service. It's a strategic asset of a nation. That way, citizens and governments understand that this is the only essential natural resource that we must care for. Without water, there is no life. ISA in addition to building this additional 1,200 and for next year 2,500 additional kilometers of water pipes, has taken a broader look. The responsibilities of ISA as a public company, it's not just a matter of building kilometers of a grid. It's not a matter of the 6 million cubic meters we sanitize a day, or the sewage waters that we clean every day. It's more than just volume and lines and lengths of pipes. We are responsible of doing epidemiological surveillance as well. The gene traces of COVID were identified in May and June in sewage waters, and so we started working with the Ministry of Health right away. But this is not just new under the current context. I said, a third of the Argentine population is under our surveillance. So we do epidemiological surveillance of many substances and pathogens, as it is done in Europe as well, because of contamination of waterways. Because of this, we are responsible of doing environmental surveillance as well, in as much as we can, where we have controls, and we are responsible of local economic development and social and environmental development, simply for our population. So we work hard in that regard, and this work, this dialogue must continue into the future to learn from all experiences and to share with everyone how Argentina is making progress in this area. Thank you very much, Malena. I pick on some of your phrases, the expectation to build an additional 2,500 kilometers of water pipelines, new solutions for old problems, innovation and a multi-layered and multi-level effort. Now I'll pose a question to Joaquin Paez. He's the president of Guadalquivir Hydrographic Confederation. So he will give us the perspective of productive uses. We'll try to be brief. Joaquin has been president of the basin or a basin organization. His federation will soon turn 100 years old. So you have faced droughts, floodings, and the Guadalquivir area is characterized by its agricultural production. 85% of water consumption goes to the agricultural sector. So, Joaquin, what can you tell us about initiatives the region has made considering water shortage, and what value is granted to water to use it more efficiently in a region, in an area where it's so precious? Good morning to Latin American viewers. Good afternoon to Spanish viewers. Thank you so much for inviting the Confederation to the 6th Water Dialogue. Thanks to the organizers. So the question is complex and long, and my answer must be long, but I'll try to be brief. Initiatives. A water basin, such as ours, the only way of supporting the system throughout time, making it sustainable throughout time, because we love it, and to maintain its benefits for long, for our citizens, for everyone who works here, the only way of sustaining it is by achieving our environmental goals, maintaining environmental conditions, recovering the condition of water resources. Our groundwater reservoirs must be maintained. So maintaining the environmental condition that guarantees agricultural production and industrial uses, because we'll make sure that way that we'll maintain the resource to meet the needs we have. That's the first initiative. And we need to understand that we are embedded in climate change. It used to be extraordinary to have extreme weather conditions, but now they are ordinary, they are common. And the third mandate arising from this, we are managing from our certainty. Climate normality that does not exist. There's uncertainties everywhere. The mandate of the Guadalquivir Confederation is every day that goes by is one day less until the next drought. So we need to understand that there will be periods of droughts and periods of floods. We know these will occur. We do not know when, so we must be ready. Citizens, users, everyone should be ready. There's a demand to have everything within our power to become ready, prepare in advance for those, and have a toolkit of solutions when these climate events occur. We are in a subtropical temperate area. We are in a transition zone. So we are subject to the rigors of climate change. Just because we are in a transition zone, we are affected by climate change more. So it's a constant state of uncertainty. And the added pressure is that, as Franz said, we have more than 890,000 hectares that need irrigation, 1/3 of the irrigated lands in Spain. And in addition, we know that during the pandemic, it is extremely important to keep agriculture running, producing foods. It is vital. I mean, it has always been vital, but now, maybe more than ever, we put the focus on it now. So the demand of citizens, of agricultural producers, we have now 500,000 hectares producing. We are producing rice. We are one of the largest rice producers. During the pandemic, when the Asian markets said that their exports might be halted, suddenly rice produced in the Guadalquivir basin started being distributed throughout the world. It's the resource for the world. So with this situation, faced with this situation, you need planning. And that's our third large initiative, planning. Planning starts, as I humbly understand, arises from scientific knowledge. You cannot plan without scientific facts and data. There's plenty on the media on the pandemic and on COVID-19. So science and scientific knowledge comes first. Secondly, climate reality. Our confederation should clearly know what our climate reality is. And thirdly, we need limits. We need to understand what the limitations of our soil and water are. Every system has its limitations. understand those limits and preserve them. And fourth, never forget that this is done to meet the needs of citizens, so that many towns don't run out of young people to work, that everyone in the rural sectors have opportunity for personal and professional development. So it is essential to have good planning.
In the hydrological basin plan, in order to go back to Fran's question, we have a special plan to manage droughts. This is managed in contexts of situational shortness, with rates that show the possibility of making a statement of an extraordinary drought where all resources will be made available to us to secure supply water above anything. Second, in the event of floods, a plan to manage the risk of floods. It is vital to find flooding areas that are more floodable, having risk and hazard plans, and have a measure plan together with the city authorities. We have a participation system. On a yearly basis, there are 3 to 4 commissions together with users. In the agricultural sector, we decide what is the plan that we can approve and what the limitations are. And there is an initiative that is quite essential, and I believe it has been brought about as a result of this, the principle of unity. Water in intercommunitary basin have to be managed by the state with the principle of unity. We cannot subject to frailty the hard challenge that exists in all the basin with all the underground water because of political occurrences or will. It might also be quite lawful at times, but I believe that this principle is a buffer to stop, to halt the situation and to secure a balance that causes strawberries, olives, rice to be irrigated and get interconnected on the water that runs on this basin. Thank you. Thank you, Joaquin. This is a summary of very remarkable things that you have stated. Ecological conservation, ruling from uncertainty, planning, considering this basin unity. These are no doubt basic reflections. Let us now move on to the third panel member, Javier Manzanares. He's the Deputy Director of Green Climate Fund, with a vast experience in the private bank. My question to him is focused on the Green Climate Fund. We know that this fund, the activity is to mitigate and to adapt and to cause resilience. And as has been very well described by Joaquin, we have more market droughts and floods that happen more often. So there is a problem that has a direct impact on the productive uses, which are on the ends. And even though we know that avoided damage, if we take preventive action, of course, yields more benefits than costs. As we continue to be acting in a reactive manner. So my question to Javier is, what do we need to mitigate these disasters related to water? Is it planning? Is it funding? Is it connected to institutionality? Is it better water? How is GCF managing this issue? Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening from Korea to all of you. It is my pleasure to be part of this discussion. I would like to thank the government of Spain and CAF. I'd like to thank Julian and Suarez for their invitation. The Green Fund, the Green Climate Fund, is the biggest fund on a global basis for climate funding. We operate in developed countries according to the Framework Convention for Climate Change, the UN Convention. This allows us to take action in around 140 countries. I should say that climate reality evidence shows that climate risks and perils are on the upward trend, and they will continue to increase over time, putting the life of millions of people at risk, causing high economic losses. The cost of not taking any action is really very high, and it is headed for being unsustainable. This further increases how important it is to have climate sustainability, how urgent it is to have climate management in at least 3 areas. We talk about prediction, forecasting, and adjusting to climate disasters, action through investment in early warning systems, supervision, hydrological supervision, increased resilience in the community, coordinated planning, and development of resilient infrastructure, of climate resilient infrastructure are several fundamental pillars. The contribution of GCF, of the Green Fund for Climate for Water in developing countries, especially in adjusting and in countries and the more vulnerable communities, is increasing resilience to the impact that results from climate change. The Green Climate Fund, through the water portfolio, has been a relevant actor to fund climate risks, especially projects that have to do with flooding management and water supply. Our share in project deployment has reached 17 countries, out of which 3 are in Latin America and the Caribbean. The purpose is to deploy a resilient development pathway where the area can resist the shock caused by climate change disasters and reduce the risk of the most vulnerable population. This is one of the cornerstones in the Green Climate Fund. So far, we have funded 607 million in 17 hydric projects around the world. These 607 million are classified. 197 million of them are water supply, 143 integrated management of water supplies, 122 to manage floods, and 45 million to manage droughts. And as can be proven here, in the Green Fund, we still have a long way to go when it comes to managing floods and droughts to reduce vulnerability of 10 million people. But on the other hand, countries have to also manage droughts and floods in developing processes through policy frameworks and planning at a national and local level. When it comes to this, the Green Climate Fund, through its water portfolio and preparation, as we call it, is a readiness program, has promoted policy development and the application of existing policies aimed at increasing resilience to risks of floods and droughts. We do so through several mechanisms, mainly so by strengthening capacities in institutions and communities run by the state, but also with technical assistance, improving the regulatory framework and that of policies. Investments in the technology framework and in governance are vital in reducing vulnerability to these perils so that affected communities will face the impacts when disasters strike. You might agree with me on this one. The degree of readiness of communities in order to face up to the challenges and impacts is directly proportional to the way in which communities and governments predict these perils. Therefore, continuous development in the early warning system is vital so that governments and communities will avoid major economic and human human losses. In connection to the readiness program, we currently have 27 projects in the readiness program, the Green Fund, the Green Climate Fund Readiness Program, at an amount of around $27 million, including activities that approach water safety or water security. So maybe here I should make some comment so as to remind Malena, the chairperson of ISA, and Benedicto Braga, the chairperson of the World Water Council, and Maria Amparo Martinez, the executive director of the National Institute of Climate Change in Mexico, to encourage them in having access to the readiness program. The Green Climate Fund Readiness Program gives up to $1 million yearly in donations to countries. We provide services to 140-something countries. It probably is the biggest readiness program around the world. And we channel it through agencies that are partner agencies. And it is important to say that we work in close cooperation with one of our partners, one of the most important ones in the Latin American region, such as CAF. With the support of these readiness funds, countries, developing countries, can apply this combination, as we referred to, policy approach and planning. This, together with the Readiness Fund and physical development through projects in order to increase resilience in vulnerable communities. We think that a balanced approach of these two is an important one to have sustainable relations to mitigate and adjust to climate change. Locally speaking, authorities can promote development of preventive measures by implementing projects that are climate-proof. As we call it, climate proofing, that will improve readiness in view of that. Some measures that local authorities can implement include the following: something as basic as risk indicators for disasters on streets, on sidewalks. Authorities can promote in a more effective manner signaling of risks on communication ways. I'm talking about the probable depth of a flooding or the indication of gaps, which is not always well indicated, internalization of risks and disasters in community, strengthening coordination between disaster management and urban planning, so that this will include urbanization patterns and the location of new infrastructure and dwellings. Countries can also make progress to prepare communities, potentially vulnerable communities. Countries can improve existing methods to prevent peril and assess risks in order to secure precision of flooding possibilities, since the majority of countries affected by climate change don't have advanced technology to forecast and map climate change. I'm talking about floods in particular. These countries need to develop and invest developing technology for remote spatial monitoring. These technologies will help countries make progress to create policies that are based on evidence, the Green Climate Fund can help countries conduct such investments and these transitions, and we always do so by channeling assistance through our accredited agencies, the so-called delivery partners. Thank you on your participation, Javier. Thank you again, especially because in Korea it's past midnight. So it is really important to share this resilience approach on this readiness program. Without a doubt, all of those that have heard you present have taken due note of this. We are past the time assigned, so on the next round, I'll ask you to be brief. I'll ask Malena to take a stance again. Considering the social perspective, we know that ISA, as other countries, offers a social rate. This social rate offered by ISA takes care of over 250,000 users, plus 1.5 million people are benefited as a result of this. My question is how to strike a balance between inclusive social policies such as these, business sustainable policies to provide the water service to the city. Thank you. That is how it goes. We have a program of social rates with several modalities. I won't go into the details because time is short, but it keenly includes users who have those who live in those households and people from the community. What we do with this social rate through this regulatory agency is to take care of the little possibilities that are left out to those neighbors who do not have the necessary income in order to meet the needs or in order to pay the bills of these two services. Argentina has a long background taking care of the people who are in most need. We go back to 1945. Ever since that moment on, lots of plans, programs came about that had to do with taking care of those who need it the most. Under the current pandemic context, lots of other measures have been taken. An emergency family income allowance, MAETD, another way to contribute with companies and stores in order to underpin employment and in order to also support the possibility for companies to keep existing. Pensions have been reinforced. The universal allowance per child and pregnancy have been reinforced. Lots of measures have been taken. The first thing we did in public utilities was to put the rates at a fixed amount. We froze them. And we also decided that it would be illegal to interrupt the service if the user was not able to pay the monthly fee or the bi-monthly fee. We also worked by walking side by side next to those that weren't able to pay the service. This is the current policy, to offer payment installments to help people have the service provided at home, no matter whether they can pay or not. In Argentina, we have more legislation that takes care of water from an environmental perspective than from the public utility perspective, it being an essential one. Hence, we are working with other agencies, national agencies, and the National Agency of Hydric Works, ENOSA, and us, so we can start a national water plan that will include not only services, but also waterways, raw waterways, in the understanding that for this water to become drinking water, well, of course, this water is our raw material. How is it done? It is quite difficult, especially in a country like ours, a developing one, with a great number of people with lots of needs, with lots of unmet needs. Hence, it is important to say how relevant the role of the state is in a company such as ISA, where 90% of the stock is held by the state. We truly believe that access to drinking water and to sewage are human rights, and as such, the universal nature of both services, it is not the responsibility of a private corporation, but of the national state. And this is reflected in this national allowance and in the allowance for the coming year. We are happy at this decision that has been taken, and we hope to keep up the balance of the company because it is important for the future operation when the service will truly become universal. I believe we will be able to meet the MDG number 6, and then having been able to fully distribute water and sewage to the entire population. Thank you, Malena, for your participation. We run short of time. My next question goes to Joaquin. Please try to be brief in your reply. You talked about something important, that being an effort of hydrographic confederations assigning efficiently and equitably, the efficient and equitable allocation of water. So let me ask you, what are the main factors that take part in appraisal of water from the perspective of users? How is the use being prioritized? Thank you.
So sorry, was muted. The data we have, climate data, and what's written in our current hydrological plan. Our basin has a water deficit of 320,000 cubic meters. In the last historic series of the last 80 years, in the last 40 years, temperature has risen half a degree. Precipitations have decreased 7% in our reservoirs and dams, 22% reduction of the level of water reserves have been identified. And this is a strategic resource essential for agriculture, highly valued. And I observe we are all concerned, and now to tackle that concern, we've made decisions. We've decided to apply the policy not to increase irrigation lands, except for those who reflect savings. If you save a certain amount of water, that water you can use it to irrigate new irrigated land or regenerated waters. So we have some lands that can only take regenerated water, and we cannot add new irrigation lands. So the policy is not to increase the size of the land we irrigate, but we maintain the infrastructure we have. We must maintain our hydrological resource plan and also modernize irrigation systems. 75% of our irrigation system is highly modernized, but that should be promoted further on because modernization implies better and effective use of water. And to producers, to farmers, we apply warranties. There is a temporary commitment for a given number of years, 30 to 40 years, we guarantee they will have the availability of a water amount so that they plan their investments based on that. That way they generate employment, they make a living, an earning on that, and that way we can have young people employed in the sector. So that warranty is essential. With farmers in the conversation of our dam, we are educating them, we exchange ideas, we constantly brainstorm, and I tell them, you will have enough water to irrigate for the next 20 years. And based on that, we plan on our irrigation systems and in the support of the reservoir. Thank you, Joaquin. And to close with the last question of the panel, to move on to the next panel, Javier, one question. We know that water has different meanings depending on the historical background, beliefs. Water is linked to all sustainable development goals. Water is at the core of development. So my final question to you. Cooperation agencies, how can they have a water policy cut across all their policies? Thanks, Franz. Certainly. Water was part of the Millennium Development Goal number 7, assuring environmental sustainability. But from there, we moved on to water being linked to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And SDG 7, you have water and sanitation explicitly in one goal. So 2 points, just to be brief as you ask. First, through coordinated development and through promoting stakeholder participation, in coordinated development, institutional mechanisms are vital for applying and implementing water goals. So institutional clarity, setting up functions and responsibilities amongst government agencies involved in the water sector is essential. With regards to promoting stakeholder participation, that's goal 6, SDG 6B, that requires the local community participation in water management and sanitation. That is required to meet everybody's needs, water needs. Stakeholder participation is essential to guarantee 3 things: that the technical and administrative solutions defined are adequate to specific socioeconomic contexts. Number 2, fully understanding the impact development decisions have on communities. And number 3, promoting local ownership of solutions to guarantee sustainability throughout time. Thank you, Franz. Thank you so much, Javier. I want to thank the 3 members of the panel. We highly value your opinions and comments and reflections. We'll certainly come back to this recording later on. It will be available to all. So without further ado, thank you, Malena, Joaquin, and Javier for joining us in this first panel. Thanks to the audience for tuning in through YouTube and our streaming. Alejandro, the floor is yours to continue.
Muchas gracias, Franz Rojas.
Thank you very much, Franz Rojas, and to the members of the panel, Malena Galvarini, Joaquín Páez, and Javier Manzanares. The panel has reflected on the value of water to guarantee health and economy for our communities. And now it is time to move on to session 2 in this Water Dialogues, Latin America and Spain, organized by CAF. For session 2, we have a panel to understand the environmental and cultural value of water. We'll hear the view of 2 top officials from Spain and Mexico and from a specialized body of the United Nations, the World Heritage Center. So I call on the speakers of this panel. Carmen Jover, Head of Water and Sanitation Cooperation Fund, will be the moderator. She is joined by the following speakers: Teodoro Estrella, the Director General of Water of a ministry in Spain; Maria Amparo Martinez, she is Director General of the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change from Mexico; and Mechthild Rosler, Director of the World Heritage Center from UNESCO. So, Jover, the floor is yours to begin moderating. Thank you, Alejandro, Franz, and to the entire CAF team for putting together this excellent virtual panel. I'll be brief because we are here to listen to our panelists. We are aware that man can cause irreversible change and large-scale change in the environment. The preservation of water resources for human consumption from productive and economic uses implies effects on the environment, changes on the environment, occasionally creating environmental disasters with different levels of impact. So when managing water, we must use tools to have a sustainable use of water resources. The objective is to reach balance in between use, environmental protection, and protection of the cultural value attached to water. So the economic use is socially acceptable in this context. So I will start with a question to Estrella, Director General of Water in Spain. Teodoro, I know that the hydrologic landscape of Spain does not provide a homogeneous answer for all our basins, but how can we balance value? What aspects are critical? What measures can we implement to achieve that balance in between use and preservation? Thank you, Carmen. Good afternoon from Spain. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to participate in these 6 water dialogues. To start with, I must say that Spain has great diversity, environmental richness throughout its territory. We have great climate variability. We have areas with rains more than 2,000 millimeters a year, and other areas where they can barely reach 200 millimeters a year. So in some regions you have resource shortage to meet the needs, to meet the demands, to meet socio-economic demands in those sectors. In particular, because of agricultural demand, the largest consumer of water is the agricultural sector within our territory. So we have the Water Act that plans provides measures for planning to maintain our water masses in good condition, aquifers, marshlands, and groundwater must be maintained according to our act. But then the use is also guaranteed. So we need to strike balance in between demand and preservation, preserving our ecosystem, preserving the environment, the water environment. Spain has a very old system for using our aquifers and water resources. It's a system of grants that dates from long before. In the hydrological plans of each basin, this is included. The use of water is planned in the basin plans. This consider flow rate levels, reservoir levels, and the levels of needs. This is considered when we grant use permits. But the challenge for coming years is to reach the environmental goals proposed for our water masses, rivers, aquifers, and marshlands. These environmental goals, in many occasions, implies that we need to recover rivers and aquifers, recover them from overexploitation that has created wealth, but it's no longer sustainable. So we need to guarantee sustainable water use. What are the measures implemented to achieve that sustainable water use? To be able to preserve the ecosystems, but at the same time meet economic needs. And I believe that has to do with the comprehensive management of water resources and through good governance. We cannot focus on one single resource at a time. All resources regulated, our dams, and resources coming from aquifers, groundwaters, the non-conventional sources, which the unconventional now seems more conventional than ever, the water that we reuse, we regenerate. By regeneration, water can be used from new uses. In Spain, mostly to irrigation, because in Spain, the main consumption of water is done in agriculture. In addition to smartly throughout our territory. I think those are the main lines of action we should follow to strike that balance between meeting water demands and protecting our ecosystems and environment. Thank you so much, Teodoro. Comprehensive water management, governance of the resource. Those are the pillars we'll keep in mind. Let's now move on to Maria Amparo, Dr. Martinez. She is the General Director of the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change. In Mexico, we crossed the Atlantic. Mexico has arid areas, hydric stress found in most of its territory. You have plenty of regulations and legislation about water use, and you have a specific legislation on ecologic water sources. So, Dr. Martinez, do you think water has the required environmental value it deserves? The floor is yours, Doctor. Good morning, good afternoon, good night for the people in Korea. Well, in fact, our legislation since 2012 established ecological water flow. It determines what the procedure is to determine the minimum water level required to maintain ecosystems. Mexico is in the midst of a socio-economic crisis of the water resource. Of course, deterioration in our basins and aquifers is well advanced, and I agree with the comments by Teodoro. This is not just a risk for human population, but for the entire ecosystems, for the entire functioning of our territory. So in this regards, the approval of our legislation has been very effective for the preservation of our water resources, the large marshlands, and to preserve the balance in between the natural elements in the water cycle.
To the question as to whether we do give enough environmental value to water, I would say that we give it increasing value, but I should also say it depends on where and when. In Mexico, we have a very unequal situation in many senses, but this does not exclude water. There is an arid, semi-arid area that takes up almost half of the country, another one where there's a lot of water and frequent floods and hurricanes and cyclones. I would say that the environmental value is determined by the relation that the society establishes with it. One of the problems that I believe that we are faced with, and luckily we all are here internationally together, but we are focused on finding a solution. That's what I mean to say, is that by and large, water, even in meetings that we frequently have on the subject matter where other topics are excluded, meaning cultural and social issues and health-related issues and environmental issues as a whole, is that a hydric resource role has been assigned to water separated from the territorial context. How about its connection to the ecosystems and the hydrological cycle and people living by those ecosystems and depending on those ecosystems? No link was made to every component when we talk about planning. This concept on water as a resource that can be separated from the territory and other human beings and as a commodity can have dire straits consequences, as we have seen on this pandemic. So in order for us to give to water an environmental value, we have to perceive it from a holistic perspective. This does not only mean a concept change, but one in planning as well. How do we have to go about planning the use of water, and on that, give it an environmental value, a holistic one? In Mexico, our commitment is to update planning and management instruments. We are focused on this. We have made progress in putting together plans for a comprehensive basin management, considering the demand and the supply, also considering the constant uncertainty situations and the environments that are involved in the territories that we are planning on. We have to give them a differentiation, having water as a base resource together with all other elements. We try to reflect this in the framework of nationally determined contributions, setting out actions that will strengthen the comprehensive management of hydric resources and of productive systems that provide for food safety, and much at the same time having an understanding of the part of natural solutions, soil biodiversity and agrobiodiversity. I would finally say that now more than ever before, we see that this management, basin management, I fully agree that this is how it can work better and be more efficient, has to focus as well on the context of climate change. It is really important to incorporate potential impacts of climate change in planning processes. With that view in mind, we need to further support research in this field in order to have better compliance, or in order to better meet the challenges brought about by planning with the climate change perspective. This should be part of what I wanted to say in connection to this. And additionally to environmental issues, we need to take into consideration the cultural perspective, and we also have to take into consideration local planning. Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez, on how brief you've been. I take home this holistic view to see whether we can generalize having value to the environmental connotation water has right at the center. We will now go to Dr. Rosler, the director of the World Heritage Center in UNESCO. Good morning. My question will focus on the cultural value of water. The statement of the Ministerial Conference on Water and Cultural Diversity in 2003 said that due to its fundamental role in the life of society, water has a strong cultural dimension to it. Without understanding or considering the cultural aspects of the problems in connection to water, no solution for a sustainable future can be found. I don't know whether we have made much progress ever since, but I wanted to see whether we can land on this, to see what the value, the cultural value of water is all about. What is it that we should understand when we talk about the cultural value of water? We know that many native people, in their cosmovision, they assign a lot of cultural value to water. Taking care of their diversity, is it possible to find common denominators that will help us know what the principles are and what values are that we have to take care of? You may take the floor now.
Yes, a todos, buenas tardes.
Good morning to you all. Good afternoon.
UNESCO. You see the famous fountain from the UNESCO gardens, the water fountain behind me. And I agree with Maria that we really need to have a holistic approach, because water is essential for human lives and it is fundamental for all civilizations around the world. Fresh water is one of the basic needs for the survival of human beings. So it's not surprising that ensuring the availability of fresh water and conserving water resources has been central to many cultures around the world. Where water is scarce, civilizations have invented very sophisticated ways to manage water resources. And water heritage reflects a human ingenuity and tireless efforts and trial and error to achieve optimal use of water in often very challenging environments. This human ingenuity is celebrated through many cultural and natural World Heritage sites on UNESCO's list, under the framework of the World Heritage Convention. Excellent examples of these can be found in Spain, for example. The cultural landscape of the Serra de Tramuntana is a terraced agricultural landscape with highly sophisticated waterworks systems, which was inscribed on the list in 2011, and it bears significant testimony to human adaptation to difficult environmental conditions with scarce resources. More recently, the Risco Caído and the Sacred Mountains of Gran Canaria cultural landscape is another outstanding example of long-term interaction between people and the environment with unique water collection and distribution systems. And similar systems can be found all around the world. If the Aflach irrigation systems, for example, in Oman, or the Persian Khanat systems in Iran, or the cultural sites, large oasis systems in the Emirates with sophisticated water supply systems. At the same time, the World Heritage Convention protects some of the most important wetlands in the world with critical biodiversity and ecosystem services for the provision of fresh water and food for local communities such as Saloum Delta in Senegal or the Butch Bim cultural landscape in Australia. And these are also unique food-producing waterscapes. We don't have only landscapes, we also have waterscapes embedded with traditional knowledge and practices of indigenous peoples and communities. And many expressions of the living cultural heritage under UNESCO's Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage illustrate certain cultural values towards water. Fostering notions of respect, custodianship, and connectivity towards it. The places of memory and living traditions of the Otomi Chichimeca people in central Mexico, for example, encompass symbolic and spiritual meanings and practices related to nature and rooted in the value system of the communities. And they include a calendar of rituals which are centered on water, a scarce element in this climate, which embody the cultural identity of the community and symbolize also endurance and vitality. And recognizing and respecting the diversity of cultural values about water and ensuring the transmission to future generations can really help to address environmental and water-related development needs in line with a community-based approach. I think that traditional practices concerning water management, guided by beliefs and traditions, can further contribute to equitable access to clean water and to sustainable water use. The art of dry stone walls, for example, found across several countries of the Mediterranean, exemplifies also building techniques in harmony with nature that seeks to ensure local resources and play a vital role in combating erosion and preventing landslides. Traditional systems developed by communities for sustainable managing water use existed everywhere, and also they are more and more important with the stress of climate change. For instance, the traditional system of the Corongos water judges in Peru is an example. And another one, the irrigators tribunals of the Spanish Mediterranean coast are also traditional law courts for water management. They date back to the 9th and 13th centuries and are aimed at setting disputes among irrigation in a transparent and impartial nature. I think we're in the context of climate change, especially where existing competition for water resources will only become more aggravated, such community-based mechanisms for resolving disputes can offer sustainable solutions. As you can see, Carmen, the values are different and reflect the diversity of cultures and approaches to water. However, it's clear from the different examples, whether it's tangible or intangible, cultural or natural heritage, that water is the essence of life, that water is linked to our identity and in many cultures, spirituality. When I worked at Lake Baikal in the Russian Federation, I realized that the water body of the lake is sacred, for example, to the indigenous peoples living there. And so for many World Heritage places, traditions existed to protect unique water bodies, lakes, springs, wells, long before any formal legal protection. And I think this is important to recognize, to understand, but also to be able to transmit these places to future generations. The heritage of water is not only a question of the implementation of the SDGs. It is a question of intergenerational equity. It is not for us that we protect the World Heritage, but we have the obligation to do so for the generations to come, as was underlined in this panel also. Finally, I would like to just inform you that the World's Water Development Report, published by UNESCO on behalf of UN Water, will be dedicated to the theme of valuing water. And we are also producing a major major publication, the forthcoming UNESCO's History of Water and Humanity. And I think this will be interesting to all of you, also with a view of informing the future. Thank you, Carmen.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor. Thank you so much. We already wish to read the report. It will be largely interesting for all of us. We all are conscious of the participation of the communities, as you referred to, being critical for sustainable water management. I wanted to get started with the second round of questions. It is more related to how climate change will affect availability, quality, and quantity of waters that are necessary to meet basic human needs. Hydrological changes induced by climate change will no doubt hinder sustainable management of water resources. In and of itself, they imply a lot of pressure and stress for 2/3 around the world. Adapting and mitigating climate change by means of inadequate hydric management becomes essential for sustainable development and, of course, to meet the 2030 rule, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, among others. I'd like to get started by the second round with you, Theodore. From your Spanish experience, how do you consider climate change for managing and planning water resources? How do you take part in it? Thank you, Carmen, for your question. It is true. I mean, what you say is true. Climate change and scenarios around hydrological climate change, climate scenarios for Spain are quite concerning. They refer to reduction in water resources depending on the scenario and the time horizon or the simulation model that may be used between 15 and 40%. We are talking of resource reduction that is of a major level. On top of this, we need to add greater variation because these are scenarios and these simulations show greater frequency and greater intensity both in dry periods and in floodings. And what did we do about it in Spain? We had planned for it in our regulations in the hydrological planning regulation that was approved in 2007. People stated that hydrological plans have to consider scenarios that involve climate change. Analysis of these scenarios should give an indication to the decision-making based on how water should be managed. This is how things have been done so far. In the plans developed so far in Spain, these scenarios have been considered, but there will be some quantum change in the next few years as a result of the passing of the Bill of Law on Climate Change and Energy Transition that is being discussed at the Spanish Parliament as we speak. And in connection to water, it is stated that it is not just a matter of assessing impacts, what is the increase in frequency and what not, but we should also see vulnerability of different territories to climate change, what the risk is that these territories are having to climate change. And this should not be done only by analyzing availability of hydric resources, but consider other environmental measures as well that are showing us the way the ecosystems are going. So I am of the opinion that under these new plans that we are putting together right now that will be put to the referendum early next year, we hope that by late February or early March, climate change should be considered with bigger momentum, with bigger than the one in the past. And we think that it is absolutely essential for us to be the case, for this to be the case, because when we talk about resource scarcity, they will have an impact on the environment. We have to have this into consideration when it comes to planning. The scenarios that are currently being simulated in the various hydrographical catchment areas in Spain show how important it is for us to consider all sorts of resources. As was referred to by the first question, we should be using superficial resources in our catchment areas and underground water, resources that come from reutilization or water comes from the sea. This makes us far more resilient under the various systems, the various management systems. But in spite of that, and I should say this, many of these scenarios, even in the most critical cases, even when we do all this, we just try to improve availability of resources that we have, securing greater connectivity in our systems. That might not even be enough. We might have to consider in the future, in the mid to long term, a new priority assigned to water resources, having more efficient crops, having more productive crops with a different yield. That is one of the biggest challenges we'll be facing with in our countries in the next few years. And of course, they have already been considered, or they will be considered in these plans that will be put out to the public opinion.
Thank you, Teodoro. Managing from uncertainty, as said earlier, we need to include all variables in our plans. What's the situation in Mexico, Amparo? What's the effect of demographic growth and climate change on the availability of the water resource? What measures have you taken to face this situation? Thank you. Well, the pressure, in fact, even without climate change, in terms of demands, it's still there. At a national level, only 58% of the country population has water available uninterruptedly in their homes on a regular basis and has regular sewage service. 12 of the 32 states are backward in their service accessibility. Universal access to water in Mexico requires investments equal to that amount to everything invested in the second half of last century, and climate change comes on top of that just to make it much worse. The demographic condition, as you resolve problems on population distribution, demand increases because of a larger population. Climate change makes it all more complex. According to the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPC, it is expected that climate change will intensify current stress suffered by water resources because of demographic features and because of economic features, because of changes in use of soils and urbanization. And it is clear to all of us that countries will be affected in different levels by climate change. And within countries, there will be large differences as well. One of the differences we predict from region to region and from country to country is that there will be quick depletion of water sources, and the scarce resources available will face a greater demand, and humans will be more vulnerable to extreme weather conditions. This is known to affect all sectors of the population, but the impact will be more severe on sectors that are socially vulnerable and that face economic and social inequalities. Therefore, planning in Mexico cannot be equal for areas that have large resources of water, though the precipitation will decrease in those areas as well because of climate change. But we should not plan equally in areas where they usually have floods and sea floods, which are already frequent. You cannot plan the same in those areas than you do in areas that are used to droughts and where the most vulnerable live. Historically, the impact is worse in 17 of our federated regions, so 17 littoral states, seaside states. But in the last 20 years, droughts have caused economic losses equaling to billions of dollars. From 2012 and 2013, Mexico faced droughts that covered almost 90% of our national territory. So it's important to bear in mind these differences that will be sharpened by climate change. Now, adapting requires decreasing the vulnerability in our population, but always forecasting for climate change vulnerabilities. It is important, and I go back to that holistic idea. We cannot plan just for the water. We need to plan to decrease vulnerability of the entire population, vulnerability to all climate problems, to all extreme climate events, whether it's drought or flooding, and to consider how this can be foreseen in economic planning and activity planning for each individual region. Understanding how to protect and restore ecosystems that provide that critical service, which is balancing and defense, for example, against hurricanes, because these are barriers to the protecting us from climate damage. We need to prevent imbalance between offer and demand of water. That's something we need to consider in our plans. An adaptive approach to climate change in the design of infrastructure and in services related to water are essential, whether it's for water access, sanitation of water, distribution of water. We need an adaptive approach. Otherwise, nothing we do will be sustainable or safe, no matter how much you invest now. It will not be sustainable if it's not adaptive. So the projects that we are currently developing, as I said, have a strong territorial component. General overarching planning is less effective now more than ever. Mexico has great challenges. We have 750 basins, 51 main rivers, 2/3 of surface water follows 7 river basins. We have storage, water storage companies, water distribution companies, water treating companies. It's a varied sector. It reveals our weaknesses, but based on that, we need to plan in the future. And including the population in this is essential. In future planning is essential. The government is responsible. All sectors have their own responsibilities, but education and social construction of adaptive capacities is essential in this regard too. I think our greatest vulnerability when we face climate change is ignorance. So we need to strengthen our educational systems, our research capacity, social participation needs to be strengthened. So everyone's aware of their vulnerabilities and their potential and the potential impact of climate change. I insist, water is one of the main axes, but it's not isolated from the holistic management for sustainable development and for adapting to climate change. Thank you so much, Maria Amparo. We pick on that. The differential features of territories, infrastructure to adapt, and the necessary involvement of social adaptation, critical elements of our response to climate change. To wrap up this Q&A, from that perspective, that global perspective of the cultural value of water, what do you think the effects of climate change are doing on that cultural value of water in the different communities at a global level? The floor is yours.
As climate change, the water cycle is expected to undergo further significant change and in many cases negative consequences. A recent analysis on the situation of Mediterranean World Heritage Sites pointed out that increased and more frequent rains and runoff could lead to increased flooding and in some cases sea level rise and coastal flooding. You all have the pictures of Venice underwater in your mind. To give some further examples, we reported many impacts of floods over the past years. The old city of Shibam in Yemen was flooded, the historic sanctuary of Machu Picchu in Peru or its port in Venezuela. And more recently, we just addressed the impacts of severe floods in Jebel Barkal and the site of the Napatan region in Sudan. Heavy rainfall there has resulted in extensive flooding, destroying homes, infrastructure, farms, livelihood of the communities. And this situation, which might make it increasingly difficult to contain due to the COVID-19 pandemic, has prompted the declaration of a 3-month state of emergency in the country. And UNESCO is monitoring closely the situation of the World Heritage Sites, which could be under threat if the rainfall continues, leading to further rise of the water levels of the Blue Nile. We also have made many reports on droughts in Timbuktu and many other sites in Africa. And so I think what will happen is that more assistance will be required on the ground at the site management level for the disaster risk preparedness, but also at the policy level. And I think this is following up what my colleagues just said. I think we need to look at that level as well. And UNESCO since 2005 had been at the forefront of exploring and managing the impacts of climate change on World Heritage. And we prepared a report on predicting and managing the effects of climate change on World Heritage and a strategy to assist state parties. This was then followed by looking at in more detail on case studies. And for example, the melting of the glaciers at Huascaran National Park or increased erosion at Chan Chan archaeological site in Peru. And in 2007, all the states parties of the World Heritage Convention adopted a policy document on the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties. And currently, we are updating this policy to new standards. And I think the point which was just raised on education is very important. I think we can use World Heritage sites because they are so well known to the general public to make more people aware of the impacts of climate change, which will affect their lives. This is not only for the sites they live in, like in many coastal cities, we provided over the past years 170 reports to the World Heritage Committee mentioning climate change. But also, if you think of tourism, for example, we did a study on World Heritage and tourism in a changing climate together with UNEP and the Union of Concerned Scientists. And we gave an overview of the increasing vulnerability of World Heritage sites to climate change impacts and the potential impact and implications for global tourism in this regard. So this is also a point we need to take into account. So I would like just to inform you that UNESCO, together with ICOMOS and the IPCC, have engaged in a cultural heritage and climate change initiative to support the integration of culture into the international climate change agenda, including the IPCC 7th assessment report. As you know, cultural heritage has an essential role to play in climate action, both as a shared global asset that needs to be protected and safeguarded from the effects of climate change, but also as a transversal resource for climate change mitigation and adaptation. I think intangible cultural heritage or the use of traditional architecture and building materials can really help communities to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Finally, the global network of 1,121 World Heritage Sites, which are continuously reviewed and reported on for any threats, establish a worldwide monitoring network, which together with other UNESCO designated sites, biosphere reserves, etc., can be used to analyze trends and provide the basis for informed decisions in conservation, in water management and climate action. Thank you very much, Carmen, and all of you. Muchas gracias.
Pues muchísimas gracias a todos los ponentes.
Thank you all very much for the presentations. I invite the audience to follow up and study in depth the topics touched by the three great speakers we've just heard. As our minister said early in the beginning, water demands are higher, and the water issue must be tackled from a different perspective. We've heard about the value of water, water as a human right, the value of water for productive uses, its environmental value, and its cultural value. We need a comprehensive approach in the 2030 agenda to achieve SDGs for all. We said water cuts across all SDGs. It's a multi-generational commitment. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you so much, Carmen, and to the three keynote speakers of session number 2. Thank you for such an enriching conversation. Water has a role to play in culture and environment. And now we are approaching the end of the water dialogues of Latin America and Spain. We had closing remarks from Fernando Jimenez Antiveros. He's the Director of Multilateral, Horizontal and Financial Cooperation of AECID. Thank you so much. Honestly, I'm impressed by the high quality of all presentations. I have learned plenty of water resources this afternoon. I would like, if I may, to insist on the commitment of Spain to current and future generations to make their right to water access effective. This is a commitment to the most vulnerable parts of our community. I think that's a point that was touched on all presentations. A holistic approach to the water issue is required. The environmental and healthcare features that might arise from the pandemic have an impact on the most vulnerable. So all the interventions of our agenda, considering the 2030 agenda, the basic rights to water and sanitation, that's part of the agenda. Don't leave anyone behind. That's something that we bear in mind. we have creator Carmen Jover in FECAS. FECAS was created with two key objectives: to contribute to enabling the human right to water and sanitation, and that has brought in the cooperation of Spain and the SDGs further on. We have made evident many points in these presentations. I'll point out just some highlights. In a holistic approach to water, it's not just a matter of the exploitation of the water resource that we are concerned with, but that connection between water and territory, water and environment, soil, agriculture, agricultural diversity. As Dr. Martinez pointed out, water should not be considered as a resource in isolation. It's not a resource that can be separated and detached from human beings. And this translates to policies and governance. Another point that was highlighted, governance. About governance, I want to point out that the General Director of Water mentioned that historically in Spain, hydrologic basin concept, it was considered as a territorial unit of action. That's a good starting point. I also want to highlight the relationship with the environment. The context of mitigation of climate change, that concept of adaptation. And just to quote my Mexican colleague, I enjoyed it because what causes greater damage to the environment other than the pandemic now is ignorance. I like how you all highlighted education. It is key for sustainability and for the legitimacy of water management. This is not an infinite resource, but still it should be for free because we all have the right to access water. So it must be a sustainable resource. Sustainability is linked to everything, and it's based on antique and old practices, cultural practices that we should recover and apply. And I like how we've made a distinction between the value of water as a resource and the value of water for culture. I think that's an emphasis we should maintain. Water quality and the prevention of the pandemic are other key points. We have changed our way of living in the last 8 months, so we should reflect on how we maintain water because it's a valuable asset we require for our health. SDG 17, the ecosystem of development is more complex with time, and we have more public and private stakeholders with resources and technical capacity dealing with it. The Spanish cooperation and the Water Fund programs make the most of the expertise of public agencies of Spain leading in the water sector and different excellent capacities from public agencies in Latin American countries. I want to congratulate once again the organizers. I enjoy how we are consolidated in the 6 water dialogues. I like definitely this concept of dialogue. We are all here humbled by the lessons taught by the 2030 agenda. We have global problems. There aren't emerging and developed countries just per se. It's because there are global problems and we haven't yet globally addressed them. And so we encourage, in particular, within the framework of institutional cooperation, that you all work jointly with CAF and the International Spanish Cooperation Agency. So thank you very much for your cooperation and participation. I know we don't really like meeting virtually, though we are getting used to it to a certain extent, but let's hope that soon the crisis will be overcome and we'll reach our new normal. Thanks and welcome to all speakers.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Fernando Jiménez Antiveros. We continue in this block of conclusions. We give the floor to Julián Suárez, the Vice President of Sustainable Development of CAF. You can take the floor now, Mr. Suárez. Thank you, Alejandro. We are coming to the home stretch of very fruitful discussions that help us. And I'd like to borrow Fernando's statements with this cooperation that will continue between Spain, Latin America, and the Caribbean through CAF in connection to water management. And we have surpassed the challenge of virtuality. Once again, and on this 6th year in a row, we have approached issues that are significantly current dated for managing resources. This is an unprecedented virtuality. These continue to be issues that are very relevant for the future livelihood of Latin America and the Caribbean, beyond the special context of a pandemic that makes more relevance than ever before this issue for livelihoods, for economy, for gender equality, and for inclusion in general. We still have a challenge of having this agenda for the mid to long term, as has been stated here. Challenges and the comprehensive management of water resources are not current dated. They are current dated, but they also connect to the future. We cannot take care of one goal or another. We cannot decide between the current situation and the long term. We have to take care of both things, taking into consideration that no one should be left behind. No today, no tomorrow. We have agreed between CAF and the General Office of Water and the Spanish Agency of Cooperation for International Development to discuss something as significant as the water value is, heightening this essential commodity for life and sustainable development in its true nature, considering its intrinsic nature, the cultural value, and how relevant it is to promote sustainable development agendas. I have a very complex challenge ahead of me. I was asked to make some strokes on the highlights of the outstanding participations, but as time is running short and as Fernando did a very good job of this, I'll try to be as brief as I can be. I should get started by saying that in preparing the workshop, the message of Minister Teresa Ribeira was very inspiring. These dialogues have become a classical dialogue. We, as Fernando was saying, we continue to learn. We learn from this dramatic current situation, and we need to rethink basic notions. We need to think with solidarity, with one view that will focus on what really matters, equity and sustainability. The minister also talked about the response that Spanish waterway operators are having in view of this pandemic. And on the side of CAF, I recognize the effort that Latin American and Caribbean operators are making along these lines. And as the minister was saying, the agenda that Spain is carrying out is very relevant for the early detection of SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater. where CAF and Spain are also contributing in order to bring these experiences down to Latin America. The minister also talked about the opportunity of working in the midterm agenda. It is very good to take care of emergency, but we should not miss sight of the midterm perspective by optimizing the water resource, promoting digital transformation and innovation, as well as a timely care of water, promoting a green agreement. The motivational message was the conclusion. We need to work all together so that these dialogues will have the right space to think about the how, and then we have the challenge to move forward to action. Luis Carranza, the executive president of CAF, warned on the persistent gaps of access to water and sanitation. That is the case with Latin America and the Caribbean. 65 million Latin American people don't have access to safe water at home. Almost 300 million don't have secure sanitation. And in this unprecedented pandemic situation, this is necessary for these million people that have no basic access to water. And it's a first-order solution to avoid problems in climate change. The simple need to wash hands with water and soap. Minister Carranza motivated us into reflecting that in only 10 years we need to meet the goals planned in the agenda for sustainable development. We have the responsibility, all the stakeholders that work in this sector, to orient these public decision policies more firmly so in order to achieve an objective of sustainable development, ODS or SDG 6. The conference by President Savetti, the honorary president of the World Water Council, highlighted how important the role of water is in bringing societies together, in promoting health, especially in precarious settings, considering that one of the most significant vulnerabilities in Latin America is that the process of urbanization, the accelerated urbanization process, is not entirely well done. 1 every 4 Latin American people live in these settlements, exacerbating their own vulnerable nature. Also, he highlighted the fundamental value of water to strengthen economy, ecology, culture, and religion as symbolic ways of relating with water. He called our attention on one of the 4 mega global trends that will shape up the future by 2030, the relation between food, water, and energy. And along these lines, he said that energy crisis can be solved, but the water supply cannot be solved. Finally, he made reference to the bi-directional nature between greater risk, greater vulnerability, and food lack of safety and development, or food insecurity and development. It is necessary to understand the cause-effect situation between risk and development in order to tackle it timely. The first panel session, the water value for consumption and productive uses, leaves behind several lessons. Malena Galmarini, the chairperson of ISA, highlighted the relevance of the human right to water, emphasizing access as a principle of social justice. She said that in ISA they do have the will to promote a bill that will recognize this right, specifically so in Argentinian public policies. When she was asked on the value of water for human consumption, she said that it is ISA's priority to reach as many users as possible with drinking water, and they have an expansion plan in mind to cover popular neighborhoods, shanty towns, or informal settlements, highlighting that this social consideration that many times is antagonistic to financial sustainability of operators is the one that all operators should have in mind, especially so in such a delicate situation as the current one, in connection to the balance and public policies, inclusive public policies, and sustainable business policies. She talked about the possibility of us understanding water as a basic good and as a strategic one, building this with a human perspective, incorporating social policies and innovation in the framework of this dimension of water resources. Joaquín Pérez, the president of the Hydrographic Confederation of Guadalquivir, with this view on water and productive resources in an environment of droughts that are prolonged and floods that alternate with droughts. He highlighted about how important it is to plan. This is a common denominator among most participants, and he also talked about how relevant it is to manage water in a rational manner, and this is significant for a region where 85% of water that is used for agriculture, with 190,000 hectares for irrigation. Ruling from uncertainty is a mandate on the part of cooperation. Climate change has already arrived, and every day that goes by is one day less to prepare for droughts. He highlighted that we need to manage basins under a principle of unity in order to secure the ecologic flow. Javier Manzanares, on his part, the executive director of the Green Fund and the chairman of the association, the International Association on Sustainable Economy, he highlighted the need to continue fighting for climate change in a systemic manner. Planning, managing are pillars on which this fund, the greatest fund in the world, will approach this agenda. He said that climate change weakens ecosystems and contributes to environmental degradation. It devoids us of defenses. It makes us all more vulnerable. The second panel that was wonderfully managed by Carmen Coval, one of the participants talked about the balance around water with an adequate, transparent management approach of hydric resources. This agenda talks about timely mechanisms of quality, institutionality, and the participation of all stakeholders, fine-tuning financial and economic instruments. Theodoro was talking about the water law in Spain and the balance between the right balance between demands and the preservation of ecosystems. He talked about the hydrological planning and the plans per se that will shortly be put to a referendum in Spain, based on which policies around water are coordinated to protect aquatic systems. He reminded us of two essential measures: integrated management of water resources and good governance, additionally to a very thorough knowledge to help people make decisions in a timely manner to manage this resource in a more efficient manner. Maria Amparo Martinez, the executive director of the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change in Mexico, highlighted on the fact that all living forms in the planet require water for sustainability and survival. The cultural value of water is determined by the relationship established between society and this in connection to nature. This is also seen in the Mexican regulation on ecological effluents, showing that minimum water should be preserved in waterways to preserve biodiversity, considering how the use of water should be planned to give it fundamental holistic values that will trickle down in economic activities. The biggest challenge of climate change, as Maria Amparo was saying, is ignorance. Climate change impacts those who live under vulnerable situations most, and therefore the approach to get adapted to climate change should be in agreement with the territorial differences in the different societies. Ms. Roswell, the director of the Center of the World Heritage in UNESCO, highlighted something interesting. She said the value of natural resources such as water that are based on the interaction between people and their environment. Cultural landscape are the interface between nature and culture, between material and immaterial heritages, and between biological and cultural diversities. It represents a mesh of interactions, cultural presence of identity of people themselves, water being the essence of life, as she said, and I'm quoting her, and heritage is not just in terms of complying with the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, but it has an intergenerational perspective to protect the global heritage. I should say now, to end, that the theme around which these dialogues have pivoted beyond the current pandemic situation is a call to urgent action to give renewed value to water from the understanding that its multiple uses and benefit are important for human consumption, for health, for life, for economic development, preserving its own integrity, its fundamental value, and it's the right space to give value to this cultural good we've been speaking so much of today. We should promote responsible consumption in favor of water safety in Spanish America. These are the principles of CAF's agenda. They shape up the future development of this agenda. So thank you all so much for your contributions. I also want to take advantage of the opportunity to thank the government of Spain on behalf of the colleagues of ICID. We would like to thank how much of a cooperation you've made to Latin America, and also my colleagues in CAF, Water Coordination CAE, the Office of Strategic Communication, who have enabled this, additionally to the support of CAF's office in Europe, that is always attentive to working on this sustainable development agenda. Also, our media partners. Jorge Alejandro, I'll give you the floor to continue with discussions. Thank you so much, Julian Suarez, for this very thorough summary of the key moments of this event. We now give the floor to José Antonio García, the representative in Europe of CAF, for closing the ceremony. You can take the floor now.
Gracias. Quisiera dar unas breves palabras finales para agradecer a las autoridades del Gobierno de España, en especial a la vicepresidenta cuarta y ministra para la Transformación Ecológica y el Reto Demográfico, doña Teresa Rivera, al Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores, Unión Europea y Cooperación, al Ministerio de Asuntos Económicos y Transformación Digital, quienes junto con la Vicepresidencia de Desarrollo Sostenible de la CAF han logrado una vez más, aunque hoy de manera virtual, crear este espacio de discusión y diálogo sobre un tema que tiene una relevancia y pertinencia crucial en los tiempos que vivimos.
To all of us. I congratulate the speakers for their wonderful presentations, and I thank the participants of the guiding agencies of water resources, those responsible for managing this resource. And I want to thank everyone joining us this afternoon. Strategic cooperation between CAF and the Spanish government in terms of water. This cooperation has strengthened since it was started in 2014. We have managed to have joint leadership and experience in the willingness to cooperate. And CAF has also provided support through their multidimensional water agenda. This cooperation has translated to training programs to government officials, such as the ones we've had in Argentina and Bolivia, or in virtual courses on safety, which was carried out for large dams in Spain, and residual management treatment courses, and sanitizing management programs. All training human resources around this topic. We've had several technical visits of government officials to companies and institutions in Spain to learn first-hand management and earn experience from water agencies. CAF wants to strengthen this strategic cooperation to work to ensure offer and improve management of such a critical resource as water. You are all invited to the 7th Water Dialogues, which we hope we can celebrate in person next year. We'll continue promoting all these key significant topics, sharing the experience of Spain and CAF in creating positive impacts in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you. Thank you so much, Garcia Belaunde. And so we bring to an end the 6th Water Dialogue. You can see the highlights of the meetings and share your impressions in social media with the hashtag AgendaCAF and Water. The videos of the presentations and panels will be available in the website of caf.com and agua.es. So greetings on behalf of CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America.